Welcome to the channel, where mysteries unfold with every story. Tonight, we journey back to Cairo in the winter of 1934. Within the quiet walls of a Coptic convent, the lifeless body of a celebrated archaeologist is discovered in the cloister garden. But this case is no ordinary crime. There are two attempts at murder hidden in its shadows, and only Hercule Poirot can determine which hand truly struck the fatal blow. Your support helps keep these mysteries alive. If you enjoy these stories, please consider subscribing to the channel, and for those who wish to dive even deeper, memberships offer ad-free listening and exclusive cases. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? I always enjoy reading your responses. Now, pour yourself a warm cup of coffee, lean back, and prepare to uncover a killing in Cairo. Let's unlock the chapters together. Chapter 1. The Call of Cairo. The letter came to me on an otherwise uneventful Tuesday morning in February. It was delivered to my rooms at Whitehaven Mansions, its envelope marked with a handwriting I could recognize even in my sleep. Those sharp, elegant flourishes belonged to none other than Hercule Poirot. Before I even broke the seal, I knew the contents would be extraordinary. Inside, Poirot wrote in his usual precise tone, "My dear Hastings, Cairo has proven most beneficial to my health. The winter sun here has accomplished what London's bitter damp could not. The bronchitis that plagued me has entirely vanished. But it is not merely the climate that delights me. A matter of great subtlety and intrigue has presented itself, one that requires your steady eye and unwavering companionship. If you can manage it, join me without delay. I am residing at the Pension des Roses in the Coptic quarter. Do bring appropriate clothing. The Egyptian sun, even in winter, makes no concessions." That was enough to stir my curiosity. Within 2 days, I found myself aboard a steamer bound for Alexandria, a small case packed with little more than linen suits, a pith helmet, and an eagerness to know what mystery awaited. Cairo in winter was a revelation. Instead of the oppressive heat I had dreaded, the city glowed with a warm golden light. The air was alive with scents, rich coffee, pungent spices, the faint dryness of desert winds, and the dust of ancient stones. To walk through its streets was to feel the weight of civilizations layered one upon the other, each leaving behind whispers of grandeur and ruin. I soon reached the Pension des Roses, a modest guest house tucked within the narrow lanes of the old Coptic quarter. The building itself was a curious blend, heavy Mamluk stonework forming the base, wooden Turkish balconies stretching above, and a roof capped with bright red tiles that would not have looked out of place in some Mediterranean village. Poirot had secured for himself a corner room on the first floor, from which he could gaze across rooftops and minarets to the towers of the ancient churches nearby. Madame Habib, the proprietress, ushered me in with warm hospitality. There, by the window, stood Poirot himself. Though clearly improved by the climate, he still bore the traces of recent illness. A little thinner than usual, his collar not quite as rigid, and his step lacking its customary sharpness. Yet his eyes, keen, green, and glittering with intelligence, were entirely unchanged. "Ah, mon ami Hastings," he greeted me, rising with delight. "The sea voyage has done you well. You arrive looking rested and in good humor. It pleases me greatly." We sat together, sipping the thick, aromatic coffee that Madame Habib had set before us. As always, Poirot's few belongings were laid out with impeccable order. His patent leather shoes aligned neatly by the bed, his brushes arranged like soldiers on the washstand, and his books organized in some system only he could decipher. Even in foreign lodgings, his passion for order never faltered. At last, I pressed him. "Come, Poirot. Your letter was maddeningly brief. What case brings you here to Cairo? Surely it is not mere archaeology that has lured you from London." A spark lit in his eyes as he leaned forward. "You are correct, mon ami. I have been summoned to assist with a matter of great discretion. The Mother Superior of the Convent of St. Catherine has sought my counsel. That ancient convent is famed for its remarkable collection of manuscripts, some dating back to the earliest days of Christianity in Egypt. For the past year, a celebrated British archaeologist, Sir Julian Markham, has funded their restoration. To outward appearances, his work is one of pure philanthropy, yet—" Poirot paused, tilting his head with meaning. "Beneath this surface, I sense currents of tension. All is not as harmonious as it seems. Outside, the afternoon city pulsed with life. The rhythmic clatter of donkey carts on cobblestones, vendors crying out their wares, the haunting call to prayer echoing through alleys steeped in centuries of history. It was impossible not to feel that Cairo itself was a stage where countless dramas had played out and would continue to do so." Poirot went on, lowering his voice. "The Mother Superior is a formidable woman, sharp of mind and unshakable in faith. Yet when she speaks of Sir Julian, I sense a note of restraint, even disapproval. That, Hastings, intrigues me greatly, for where faith, power, and ambition converge, there, inevitably, human weakness reveals itself." As twilight drew its veil across the sky, painting the horizon with shades of amber and violet, I realized Poirot had only shared a glimpse of the puzzle. What seemed like a philanthropic effort within the convent might yet conceal secrets as old as the stones of Cairo itself. Chapter 2: Sacred Ground and Secular Disputes. The next morning, Poirot and I set out together, weaving our way through the winding alleys of the Coptic quarter. The air was alive with the soft pealing of bells, their notes drifting above the rooftops and echoing across the narrow streets as though guiding us toward our destination. Slowly, the convent of St. Catherine emerged from the maze of buildings. First, the pale stone walls rose into view, weathered by centuries, yet unyielding. Then came the heavy wooden gates, iron-studded and scarred by age, until at last we passed through into a courtyard of serenity. A fountain murmured in its basin, and gardens of herbs and flowering plants gave the place a stillness that felt far removed from the bustle of Cairo. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot murmured, pausing to take in the sight. "Do you see how the very stones tell their own story? The lower courses, Byzantine work; the upper, Islamic influence, and yet all blended into something distinctly Egyptian." We were greeted at the entrance by a kindly-faced sister, her years etched upon her features, but her eyes calm with a peace born of lifelong devotion. She led us through the courtyard and into a plain reception room. Its whitewashed walls and unadorned furniture spoke of austerity, yet the atmosphere held an unmistakable tranquility. A moment later, Mother Superior Agatha entered. She was tall, with a bearing of quiet authority, her eyes sharp with intelligence. Though dressed simply in her immaculate habit, she carried herself with a dignity that needed no embellishment. "Monsieur Poirot," she said warmly, inclining her head, "your presence honors us. And this must be Captain Hastings, of whom you have spoken." Poirot bowed with courtly grace. "Indeed, Reverend Mother, my friend has accompanied me from England. His observations have often proven most useful." "You are both welcome," she replied, seating herself across from us. "Before we speak of the matter that troubles us, perhaps you would care to see something of our community." The tour she led us on was both fascinating and revealing. In the library, rows of manuscripts were carefully wrapped in protective cloth. Sister Mary Magdalene, the elderly custodian, looked up from her work with a gentle smile. Her lined face softened as Mother Superior explained, "Sister Mary has spent 3 decades cataloguing these texts. Her knowledge of Coptic writings is unmatched." From there, we passed into the scriptorium, where 2 young nuns bent over parchment with unwavering concentration, their pens moving with the precision of medieval scribes. The treasury followed, where Sister Catherine, a brisk, practical woman with shrewd eyes, showed us ledgers of meticulous accounts. I noticed how her gaze lingered upon the valuables in the room, as though she calculated silently what each was worth. "Our convent is modest, but it sustains itself," Mother Superior said as we walked through the herb garden. "For over 15 centuries we have preserved these traditions, maintaining the spiritual life of our community." Among the rows of plants, my attention was drawn to a young novice. She moved gracefully, tending to medicinal herbs with practiced hands, her dark eyes cast downward. When introduced, she curtsied quietly. "Sister Helena," Mother Superior explained. "She has been with us 6 months and shows admirable devotion." I was struck by her delicate beauty, softened by an expression of deep sadness that clung to her like a shadow. Poirot, too, observed her closely, his gaze lingering as she returned to her work. It was at this moment the calm was broken by a new presence. A booming voice echoed across the courtyard before the man himself appeared. "Mother Superior, surely you will reconsider the matter of the eastern boundary." Sir Julian Markham was unmistakable. Tall, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and possessing the easy authority of one long accustomed to command. His attire was fine, yet adapted for field work, the clothes of a man who straddled the worlds of lecture halls and dusty excavations. Mother Superior's expression shifted subtly, her warmth cooling into reserve. "Sir Julian," she said evenly, "allow me to present Monsieur Poirot and Captain Hastings, visitors from England." "Ah, delighted," Markham declared, offering us the practiced courtesy of a man who never quite relinquishes the spotlight. An extraordinary collection of manuscripts here, though of course modern preservation could extend their life immeasurably. Tradition has its place, Reverend Mother, but science must carry us forward. The methods that have preserved these works for centuries, she replied with measured calm, seem adequate to me. Markham waved the objection aside. Yes, but we must embrace progress. Speaking of which, I do hope you'll reconsider those excavation permits. Our surveys beyond the eastern wall suggest the remains of structures older than the convent itself. Imagine what we could uncover. Or destroy, she countered firmly. That ground has been consecrated for more than 1,000 years. It is not merely an archaeological site, it is sacred. A shadow crossed Markham's expression, though he tried to dismiss it with forced geniality. "My dear Reverend Mother, surely a few careful trenches cannot disturb the dead." "The answer remains no," she said with quiet authority. "Some things lie beyond curiosity." A silence followed, heavy and uncomfortable. I saw irritation flicker in Sir Julian's eyes, matched by the immovable resolve in the Mother Superior's. Behind them, I noticed Sister Helena watching with strange intensity, her pale face turned toward Sir Julian with a look I could not quite decipher. The spell broke when the chapel bell rang for prayers. The sisters filed past us, some casting anxious glances back. Sister Catherine lingered a moment, her calculating gaze moving from Sir Julian to the Mother Superior, as though weighing the power between them. As the shadows lengthened across the convent walls, I could not shake the sense that beneath this surface of devotion lay fault lines, cracks that might one day give way to something far darker than scholarly disputes. Chapter 3. Vespers and Venom. Night descended upon Cairo with the swiftness unique to the desert, the last threads of daylight vanishing into a velvet dusk. The convent, bathed in the amber glow of sunset, seemed both timeless and fragile, as though the ancient stones themselves held their breath for the coming darkness. Poirot and I had accepted Mother Superior's invitation to attend Vespers, the final service of the day, where the community of sisters gathered in solemn prayer before nightfall. The chapel of St. Catherine was a sanctuary of restrained elegance. Byzantine arches stretched overhead, their curves softened by centuries of wax and incense. Faded icons watched from the walls, their gilded halos shimmering in the candlelight as though silently blessing each worshipper below. The scent of frankincense hung heavy in the air, wrapping the chamber in a sense of age-old devotion. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot whispered as we took our places among the visitors. "The architecture. See how it draws the gaze upward, pulling the mind away from worldly concerns. A clever trick, non?" His eyes gleamed with appreciation, though I suspected his sharp mind was already at work beneath the guise of reverence. The nuns entered with quiet grace, their habits rustling softly against the worn stone floor. I counted no more than 20. At their head moved Sister Mary Magdalene, her steps measured by age, while behind her came novices so young that their faces still carried the innocence of childhood. Among them, Helena stood out, her pale complexion glowing softly in the candlelight. Nearby, Sister Catherine's firm and capable demeanor seemed unchanged even here in this sacred space. The service was conducted in the old Coptic tongue, its unfamiliar cadences adding a layer of mystery to the already solemn ritual. Mother Superior's voice rose clear and steady, each phrase answered in perfect harmony by the gathered sisters. Though I understood nothing of the language, I could not help but be moved by the intensity of their faith. It was then that my attention was drawn to a detail that would later prove critical. From a side chapel, Sister Catherine emerged, carrying a chalice of silver so finely wrought it seemed less a vessel than a relic. Delicate engravings wound around its surface, depicting scenes of the Passion with astonishing precision. She placed it reverently upon a linen-covered table near the altar, a 4th-century masterpiece. Sir Julian breathed beside me, his scholar's eye fixed on the cup. Beyond price. The craftsmanship alone. His words drew frowns from several of the sisters, for he spoke with the voice of a collector rather than a worshipper. But Sir Julian seemed oblivious, wholly entranced by the object's antiquity. Meanwhile, Helena performed her duty with the censer. Her steps were deliberate, her arms swinging the ornate vessel with practiced precision. And yet, something was amiss. Her composure wavered, her hands trembled as the sweet smoke curled upward into hypnotic spirals. When she passed near Sir Julian, the smoke seemed to twist unexpectedly, disturbed by some faint tremor in her movement. I noticed Poirot's sharp eyes following her every step, his mind already tugging at the invisible threads of the moment. "Curious, Hastings," he murmured. "Air currents do not lie. They reveal more than words sometimes." As the final act of the ritual approached, Mother Superior extended an invitation to Sir Julian, acknowledging his role as the convent's benefactor. Her tone was polite, though tinged with reluctance. The archaeologist accepted eagerly, advancing toward the altar with visible pride. The chalice was lifted, blessed, and offered to him first. He drank with evident satisfaction, his face flushed in the candlelight, before returning the vessel with a bow. The deep crimson wine gleamed like jewels as it passed from hand to hand among the sisters. Helena's gaze never left the chalice. Her eyes burned with an intensity that seemed out of place in so hallowed a moment. I felt a faint unease, though I could not have said why. The service concluded with a final hymn. The voices of the nuns rose in gentle waves, echoing against the arches, filling the space with a peace so profound that it lingered even after the last note faded into silence. Slowly, the sisters dispersed to their evening duties, their footfalls soft against the stones. Sir Julian lingered, drawing Mother Superior into conversation about renovations in the convent library. Most of the congregation had gone, but Helena remained in prayer before a side altar, her clasped hands so tight that her knuckles shone white. Sister Catherine, efficient and meticulous, gathered the sacred vessels. She cleansed the silver chalice with blessed water, her movements brisk and sure, before disappearing into the sacristy. As Poirot and I prepared to leave, I remarked quietly, "A most moving service, don't you think?" "Indeed, mon ami," Poirot replied, his voice thoughtful, "yet more revealing than you imagine. People betray their hearts in the smallest gestures, especially when they believe no one is watching." We stepped back into the Cairo night, the city alive with distant music, the clatter of donkey carts, and the murmured conversations of its streets. Yet my thoughts remained in the chapel, haunted by the sight of Helena's trembling hands and the silver chalice gleaming like a beacon in the candlelight. I could not know then that within the hour, that vessel would cease to be a symbol of devotion and instead become the centerpiece of a terrible crime. Chapter 4. Death in the Garden. The hammering at our door came precisely at 11 o'clock, shattering the quietude of the Pension de Rose. I had been absorbed in a book under the soft glow of the lamp, while Poirot had already retired for the night. He appeared from his room at once, his usually immaculate hair tousled, though his eyes shone sharp and alert. "Mon Dieu," he muttered, drawing his dressing gown close about him. "Such urgency at this hour never heralds good news." The messenger proved to be a young Coptic priest, his cassock hastily thrown over what looked very much like nightclothes. His breath came in ragged bursts, his face pale with alarm. In heavily accented English he pleaded, "Please, you must come at once. The convent, a terrible misfortune has struck. The Mother Superior herself begs for Monsieur Poirot." We dressed swiftly and followed our anxious guide through Cairo's narrow streets, now washed in moonlight. Only an hour earlier, the convent had been a place of peace and ritual. Now its walls glowed with unnatural brightness, every window lit, the air alive with hurried voices. Even before we reached the gates, I sensed that tranquility had given way to turmoil. The iron gates, usually closed at night, stood wide open, an extraordinary breach of convent rule. Within the courtyard, Egyptian policemen moved about with uncertain energy, their torches throwing long, wavering shadows across the ancient stones. Their leader stepped forward, a thin man with darting eyes who introduced himself as Inspector Mahmoud. His relief at seeing Poirot was palpable. "Alhamdulillah," he exclaimed. "Thank God you are here, Monsieur Poirot. This is terrible business, something most irregular. We have never faced such scandal within the religious quarter." "And what precisely has occurred?" Poirot asked, his tone calm, though his gaze was already scanning the grounds. "Murder," Mahmoud replied gravely. "Sir Julian Markham, the English archaeologist, found in the cloister garden not an hour past. Poisoned, we believe." Mother Superior approached then, her face solemn and etched with fatigue. By lamplight she looked older, her calm dignity strained under the weight of tragedy. "Monsieur Poirot, I thank you for coming. This calamity is beyond our comprehension." "Please, Reverend Mother," Poirot urged gently, "tell us what transpired." She clasped her hands tightly as she explained. After Vespers, Sir Julian remained to speak with Sister Catherine and myself regarding the manuscript cataloguing. We concluded our conversation at 10 o'clock precisely, and I escorted him to the garden gate, as is our custom. He mentioned wishing to stroll among the herb beds before departing. He often claimed the night air aided his reflections. At 11, Sister Catherine went to secure the chapel. It was she who discovered him. Inspector Mahmoud gestured toward the cloister. "We have disturbed nothing, monsieur. The body is exactly as found." The garden was a scene of haunting beauty. Moonlight filtered through the arcaded walkways, falling in patterned fragments across carefully tended beds of rosemary, thyme, and basil. The fountain murmured gently at the garden's center, its serenity grotesquely at odds with the figure sprawled nearby. Sir Julian lay twisted upon the ground, his distinguished face contorted in the rictus of violent death. His evening coat was disheveled, his hands clenched as though resisting some unseen assailant. Beside him gleamed the very chalice we had seen used only hours before at Vespers, its silver catching the lamplight. "Curieux," Poirot murmured, crouching close. "See, Hastings, the chalice lies at an exact angle as if dropped mid-motion. Observe, too, the residue in its basin." I bent near enough to catch a sharp, acrid scent rising from the few drops of liquid within. "The communion wine?" I ventured. Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Not wine alone, I think. Regard the staining. Something else mingled here, something most sinister." Inspector Mahmoud shifted uncomfortably. "Mother Superior must be questioned. She quarreled with Sir Julian this very afternoon. Several witnessed it." The Reverend Mother stiffened, though her voice remained steady. "I understand, Inspector. You must do your duty." "Patience," Poirot interjected smoothly. "First, let us examine the scene. The truth hides itself in details." With the methodical care of a surgeon, Poirot moved through the garden. He studied footprints impressed in the dew-softened earth, traced patterns upon the ancient stones, and even stooped to examine a faint smear of some unknown substance near the fountain. "Note this, Hastings," he whispered. "The soil disturbed here, and upon this stone, a residue. Not natural to this place." Meanwhile, the nuns gathered quietly in the cloister walkway, their habits ghost-like in the moonlight. Their whispered prayers carried faintly across the courtyard. Among them, I saw Helena pale and trembling. When Mahmoud questioned the group, she gave a sharp cry and collapsed upon the flagstones. Two sisters bore her swiftly away, her fainting form like a wilted flower. "The shock has undone her," Mother Superior murmured sorrowfully. "Sister Helena is of delicate spirit. Violence is almost unbearable for her." "Delicate, perhaps," Poirot replied thoughtfully. "Yet she was the one entrusted with the incense at Vespers, n'est-ce pas?" "Yes," the Reverend Mother admitted. "It is our custom to assign such duties to novices that they may learn the rhythm of devotion." "And the chalice," Poirot continued, "was it not secured after the service?" Sister Catherine answered firmly. "I cleansed it, locked it in the sacristy, and kept the only key myself. Yet I admit, this discovery has so shaken me that I cannot recall each moment with perfect certainty." She produced the key from her scapula. Poirot studied her, then glanced at the chalice once more. Yet here it lies beside the victim, a puzzle most curious indeed. As the night waned and Poirot completed his meticulous inspection, the magnitude of the crime became starkly apparent. Within these hallowed walls had been enacted a drama as old as mankind, envy, vengeance, and betrayal cloaked in the garments of piety. Dawn's first light found the convent no longer a sanctuary, but a stage upon which truth and deception would contend, under the unerring gaze of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 5. Secrets Behind Sacred Walls. The morning after the tragedy dawned with merciless brilliance. The Egyptian sun beat down upon the whitewashed walls of St. Catherine's, dispelling the night's shadows but offering no relief from the darkness that now clung to the convent. Peace had fled. In its place came the bustle of authority. The convent's reception hall, once a place of quiet hospitality, had been transformed into the headquarters of an investigation. Tables normally used for simple meals were strewn with official papers, ink-stained notes, and evidence sealed in rough brown envelopes. The murmur of nuns' voices had been replaced by the clipped tones of policemen. When Poirot and I arrived, we found Inspector Mahmoud already deep in study. He sat hunched over a long table, his lean fingers riffling through letters and papers that lay like fragments of some unfinished puzzle. His brow furrowed, and the lines on his face suggested a man wrestling with matters far outside his usual cases of theft, smuggling, and brawls in Cairo's marketplaces. At our entrance, his eyes lifted with visible relief. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," he said, gesturing to the documents. "Perhaps you can bring order where I find only confusion. This Sir Julian, he was not the noble benefactor we believed. These papers reveal a man quite different from the image presented to the world." Poirot settled into a chair, drawing one of the letters toward him with delicate precision. "Alors, let us see what the papers whisper." What they whispered was ugly indeed. Letters from the British Embassy referred to formal complaints lodged by Egyptian workers against Sir Julian, wages withheld, promises unmet. Local merchants wrote of disputed bills, debts left unpaid, and items seized under false pretexts. But most chilling were a handful of appeals written in careful, sorrowful Arabic. Families asking for word of daughters who had gone to work in Sir Julian's household and had since disappeared. Poirot laid one such letter aside, his expression grave. "A man whose public generosity masked private scandal," he said softly. "Tell me, Inspector, what do we know of his domestic life?" Mahmoud's mouth tightened. "Strange, monsieur. He kept a house in the European quarter, but many stories place him in the native districts, lodging in secret, visiting families with daughters of marriageable age. Promises were made, reputations destroyed. Some called him a benefactor, others a predator. I fear his legacy is not the treasure of Egypt, but the sorrow of its people." As he spoke, the door opened quietly, and Sister Mary Magdalene entered. She moved slowly, leaning upon her staff, her aged features composed yet troubled. The inspector rose at once, offering her a chair. She accepted it with a nod and folded her hands tightly in her lap. "I have held my silence too long," she said at last, her voice trembling like a candle flame. "But with death within these walls, the burden of truth has become heavier than I can carry." Poirot inclined his head gently. "Courage, ma sœur. Speak, for justice is nourished by truth, however painful." Her story unfolded haltingly, each word laden with years of suppressed grief. "There was a girl, Fatima. She worked as a seamstress for European families, and we knew her well. Her mother had once been of our lay community before her marriage. Fatima was radiant, 19 perhaps, with beauty and a gentle soul. It was then she encountered Sir Julian." She paused, her hands twisting upon her lap before continuing. "He courted her with promises, marriage, a life in England, security for her family. But when she conceived his child, he vanished, claiming urgent work in the Sudan. Her family, shamed, cast her out. She came to us, begging sanctuary, but our rules were unyielding. We could not shelter her, so she lived alone in Cairo's poorest quarter, scraping existence from odd sewing work, mocked by neighbors, shunned by her kin. In time, she bore a daughter, yet her hardships consumed her. Consumption claimed her 3 years past. She died as she had lived, abandoned. Tears now traced the furrows of the old nun's cheeks. The child, Helena, disappeared soon after the funeral. Some said she sought work in European households. Others thought she fled to the countryside. I do not know. The name struck the room like a thunderclap. Poirot leaned forward, eyes glittering with sharp intensity. Helena, you say? The same Helena now in this house? Yes, whispered Sister Mary Magdalene. She came to our gates 6 months ago, asking to dedicate her life to God. She had no letters of introduction, no kin to vouch for her, yet her devotion appeared sincere. Mother Superior accepted her. She has been diligent in her duties, especially with the sacred vessels and the preservation of manuscripts. But I see now, her curiosity about Sir Julian, her questions about his excavations and his patrons, it was not the idle interest of youth. Even as her words faded, another figure appeared in the doorway, Sister Catherine. Her usually composed face was drawn tight with strain. She carried a bundle wrapped in plain white cloth, which she placed before the inspector with solemn care. "Forgive the intrusion," she said, "but I have made a discovery of grave importance." These were hidden among Sister Helena's belongings in the novices' dormitory. She unwrapped the cloth, revealing a small glass vial, empty but still carrying the faint scent of chemicals. Alongside it lay a sheaf of newspaper clippings, articles chronicling Sir Julian's achievements, his movements across Cairo and London, his archaeological triumphs. They had been cut carefully, arranged in order, kept as though part of a private archive. Inspector Mahmoud's eyes flashed with conviction. The evidence speaks clearly. A vial of poison, obsessive records, a motive of vengeance. We have our culprit. But Poirot raised a restraining hand. His gaze lingered on the scattered papers, on the trembling nun, and finally upon the window where morning light poured into the convent chamber. "Perhaps, mon ami," he murmured, "or perhaps we have only glimpsed the surface of a far deeper current. Let us not condemn too swiftly." Arrangements were made to question Helena formally once the convent physician judged her fit. For now, she remained confined to the infirmary, said to be suffering from nervous exhaustion. As we departed the chamber, I caught sight of the Mother Superior standing in the cloister garden where death had so recently struck. She gazed at the ground with an expression unreadable, part sorrow, part bewilderment, yet in her eyes there flickered something else. Not ignorance, I thought, but knowledge withheld. And it seemed to me that the convent's silence was not the silence of peace, but of secrets long buried, now beginning to stir. Chapter 6. The Pattern of Deception. By late afternoon, the cloister garden lay half in shadow, half in light, as if the very stones hesitated between peace and unease. Poirot had commandeered a stone bench as his laboratory, spreading before him a selection of borrowed objects, a simple pewter cup, a jug of red wine, and scraps of linen. Inspector Mahmoud, arms folded and brows knit, looked on with the thin patience of a man who believed time was being wasted. "You see, Hastings," Poirot explained as he adjusted the angle of the cup with his delicate fingers, "the manner of a crime is every bit as important as the motive. A poisoner cannot simply wish his victim dead. He must calculate how, where, and when the fatal act will succeed. Precision is everything." The little Belgian had obtained a common vessel from the convent kitchen, one roughly the size of the silver chalice Sir Julian had used. He filled it with harmless wine and proceeded to demonstrate a series of possibilities. How the chalice might have been tampered with, at what stage the poison could have been introduced, and how Sir Julian's final gestures might have unfolded. "Consider the timing," he continued. The communion service began at 8. Sir Julian partook of the wine, yet no collapse followed. For nearly 2 hours he carried on, speaking with the Mother Superior, conversing with Sister Catherine. Not until his solitary walk in the garden did death strike. I ventured a thought. Then surely it was a delayed action poison. Très possible, Poirot agreed, tilting his head. But such substances are rare, especially in the possession of one who lives cloistered within convent walls. It suggests either remarkable planning or a knowledge beyond the ordinary. The inspector tapped the table impatiently. And yet, Monsieur Poirot, we discovered the vial among the novice's belongings. Coupled with her personal history, what further proof do we require? Poirot's moustache twitched. Proof, yes. Certainty, no. You assume, my friend, that the mere presence of evidence points directly to guilt. But what if that evidence has been, how shall we say, arranged? He guided us to the herb bed where Sir Julian had collapsed. The soil still bore faint traces of the struggle, a patch of crushed greenery, a darkened stain where wine had splashed, impressions of cloth pressed into earth. Poirot crouched low, tracing the outlines with a meticulous finger. Observe, Hastings. The splash of the wine against this rosemary, the angle at which the chalice fell. And here, where his body lay, note how carefully the cup must have been set down. Would a man in the throes of strychnine convulsions manage such precision? His demonstration grew more elaborate. With each reenactment, wine poured, cup dropped, body imagined falling, the spillage pattern shifted. Sometimes the wine rolled clean beneath the bench, other times it sprayed outward, staining the herbs. Fascinating, is it not? Poirot mused. The poison must have taken hold gradually, affording him a few moments of lucidity. He did not collapse immediately. He had time to think, perhaps even to misinterpret his first symptoms as nothing more than fatigue. As the experiment unfolded, I became conscious of silent watchers. From the covered walkways surrounding the cloister, nuns moved like pale shadows, their gazes curious, fearful, or both. Near the chapel door, the Mother Superior stood, her face half lit by the sun, her eyes fixed intently, not on Poirot, but on Sister Catherine. The latter moved briskly among her duties, but too often her glances strayed toward our little tableau in the garden. Helena too had emerged. She sat near the fountain with a prayer book, her posture demure, her veil concealing her hair. Yet her stillness was too careful, her eyes too alert. She was not absorbed in prayer, but in observation. At length Poirot asked, "Tell me, Inspector, what says your medical examiner?" Mahmoud consulted his notes. "The preliminary conclusion is strychnine, a cruel poison, convulsions, agony, no escape. The laboratory will confirm." "Ah," Poirot murmured, "but strychnine is a blunt instrument. It acts swiftly, brutally. Had he taken it during communion, he would never have walked calmly to converse with the sisters, let alone into the garden." "No, the timing is inconsistent." The inspector frowned. "But the chalice, used only during Vespers. Afterward, it was locked away in the sacristy. How else could the poison have been introduced?" Poirot rose, brushing dust from his trousers. His eyes gleamed. "How often, mon ami, do we deceive ourselves with assumptions? The chalice, yes, it is locked away. But who holds the key? And what of the routine after the service? Does it never vary?" Without waiting for reply, he led us to the sacristy, the small chamber where sacred vessels were cleansed and stored. Sister Catherine arrived at our summons, producing the key from a chain concealed beneath her scapula. With crisp efficiency, she described the nightly ritual, rinsing the chalice with holy water, drying it with consecrated cloth, securing it within a locked cabinet alongside the convent's most precious relics. And always, Poirot asked gently. "This exact procedure is followed." Her gaze flickered, then steadied. "Always, monsieur." Though on that particular evening I lingered here for a short time afterward. Sir Julian's donated manuscripts required careful cataloguing. I remained perhaps 20 minutes, working by the window's light. Poirot drifted to that very window. From it one could see straight into the chapel, the altar visible through the bars of stone latticework. He stood there long, measuring angles, his expression unreadable. When at last we left, arrangements were made to interview Helena formally. Inspector Mahmoud insisted he would oversee the questioning. I, for my part, watched the young novice with new unease. Was she the wronged daughter of a disgraced woman, consumed by vengeance, or an innocent pawn framed by another hand far subtler? The sun dipped low, flooding the stones with amber glow. From beyond the convent walls rose the haunting chant of Cairo's evening prayers, timeless and serene. But within these sacred precincts, serenity was a mask. Beneath it, deception spread in careful, deliberate patterns, patterns only Poirot seemed able to read. Chapter 7. The Weight of Truth. The questioning of Helena took place in the convent's modest parlour, a room cloaked in stillness, its whitewashed walls echoing with the faint chants of evening prayers drifting from the chapel. As she entered, accompanied by Mother Superior, her steps were slow and deliberate, as though each movement required effort. She seemed somehow diminished, her posture frail, her presence shrunken under the heavy cloud of suspicion that hovered over her. Inspector Mahmoud, usually brisk and formal, softened his tone. "Sister Helena," he began, "we recognize the difficulty of this situation, but certain matters must be clarified if we are to understand what occurred." She lowered her gaze to her clasped hands, the rosary beads wound tightly around her fingers. When she spoke, her voice was thin, fragile, like the flutter of a bird's wings. "I will answer as best I can, Inspector. Though to me the events seem like a dreadful dream, one from which I cannot wake." Poirot, who had been observing her with that penetrating stillness of his, leaned forward. "Tell me, mademoiselle, how long had you known Sir Julian's true identity before his death?" The question fell like a hammer blow. Helena's composure fractured at once. Her hands trembled as she tried to shield her face, her shoulders shaking under the weight of suppressed grief. At last, her voice came out in a broken whisper. I don't understand what you mean." Poirot's tone was gentle, but unyielding. "Your mother was Fatima, was she not? The seamstress who once worked for European families. The woman who bore Sir Julian's child only to be abandoned, left to face dishonor and hardship alone." Mother Superior gasped softly, her eyes widening with dawning comprehension. "Dear God," she breathed, turning toward Helena. "Child, is this true?" The young novice could no longer hold back. Tears streamed freely as she nodded. Her words spilled out, raw and unguarded. "She died in my arms, Reverend Mother, in a wretched room with scarcely enough bread to sustain us. Her last words were of forgiveness. She begged me not to let hatred consume my soul, but I could not release it. Not then, not after all we had endured." What followed was a story of deliberate patience, of vengeance quietly cultivated. Helena revealed how she had studied the convent's rhythms, learning its sacred routines before presenting herself as a postulant in search of sanctuary. Her reverence for ritual, which had impressed the sisters, was in truth the fruit of careful preparation. "I knew he gave money to this place," she confessed, her voice tightening with the memory. "I believed that if I could only get close enough, if the moment presented itself, I could make him pay for abandoning her." Inspector Mahmoud scribbled notes, though it was clear his attention was fixed less on her emotions and more on the bare facts. Poirot, however, seemed intent on something subtler. The spaces between her words, the contradictions in her sorrow. His next question shifted the air in the room. "But tell me, Sister Helena, strychnine is no common substance, and scarcely something one might stumble upon within convent walls. How did you obtain such a poison?" Her eyes widened, confusion overtaking her grief. "Poison? I never obtained poison." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And yet, a vial was discovered among your things. What did it contain, if not poison?" Her answer fell like a stone in water. "Powdered glass," she whispered. "From the broken lamp in the place where my mother died. I kept it always, a symbol of what was taken from us. I thought if I could slip it into his wine, he would suffer. Not death, perhaps, but pain. Enough to make him feel what she had felt." Poirot's eyebrows arched, the faintest flicker of intrigue lighting his eyes. "Powdered glass, mademoiselle?" But Sir Julian did not perish of such a crude method. His death bore all the unmistakable signs of strychnine poisoning. The medical evidence leaves no doubt. A stunned silence gripped the room. Helena looked at him in bewilderment. Mahmoud lifted his head from his notes, visibly unsettled. Mother Superior's fingers tightened on the arms of her chair, her face ashen. "That cannot be," Helena stammered. "I prepared the glass carefully. During the incense ceremony, I paused near the altar, leaned close to the chalice while no one was watching, and dropped it in. The smoke should have concealed me, but it seemed to betray me instead, curling strangely, drawing attention." Poirot gave a slow nod. "Ah, yes. Incense in an enclosed space reveals more than it conceals. The air currents expose patterns for those who know how to observe them." His tone sharpened. "But here lies the paradox. You added glass, not strychnine. Which means another hand introduced the true poison. The truth fell over us like a shadow. Helena's act of vengeance, carefully planned though it was, had never succeeded. She had intended harm, but not death. Sir Julian had been killed by someone else entirely." Mahmoud broke the silence at last. "If she is not the murderer, then who?" His voice carried the uneasy realization that the convent harbored a deeper betrayal still concealed. Poirot moved toward the window overlooking the cloister garden, bathed now in the soft gold of dusk. His silhouette framed against the fading light, he spoke with quiet gravity. "Here we face a most curious matter, 2 attempts upon one man's life, one clumsy, ineffective, the other executed with chilling precision. 2 acts of hatred converging upon the same victim. The weight of that realization pressed upon us all." Helena sat stricken, her tears drying into silence. Mother Superior's face betrayed a terrible awareness that her convent's sanctity had not shielded it from evil. And Mahmoud, his notebook closed, stared into the shadows as though the answer might yet emerge from their depths. Somewhere within these holy walls, among women of faith and devotion, a true murderer still lingered, unseen. Chapter 8. Justice and Absolution. The morning that followed was heavy with expectation. Though dawn had broken with crisp clarity, the air inside St. Catherine's convent carried a tension that clung to every stone and every shadowed corner. At Poirot's request, the entire community had assembled in the grand hall, a gathering so rare it underscored the gravity of what was about to unfold. The hall itself was an imposing chamber, its vaulted ceiling supported by ancient columns that seemed to hold centuries of whispered prayers and hushed rituals. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, splintering into shafts of gold that danced across the weathered stone floor. Where once the sisters had walked in quiet contemplation, they now sat in uneasy silence, waiting for the truth to be spoken aloud. Inspector Mahmoud had stationed himself near the entrance, his notebook clutched tightly, as if words on a page might shield him from the unraveling storm. Mother Superior occupied the front, her bearing dignified though her eyes betrayed the strain of recent revelations. The senior sisters flanked her, while the younger novices huddled nervously behind. Helena, pale yet composed, sat apart, her place uncertain, caught between penitent and accused. Poirot stepped forward, his small frame commanding the vast chamber with quiet authority. His voice, clear and deliberate, carried effortlessly through the vaulted space. Mesdames, we meet today, not for prayer, but for justice. A crime most grave has stained these holy walls, the death of Sir Julian Markham. And though it seemed at first an act of revenge, the truth is far more complex. He turned slightly, allowing his gaze to fall upon Helena. Yes, Sister Helena, moved by grief for her mother and anger at her father's abandonment, did attempt to harm Sir Julian. Her method, powdered glass slipped into the communion chalice, was born of desperation. Yet her attempt, however tragic, did not succeed. Gasps swept the hall, a wave of shock and horror. Several sisters crossed themselves instinctively, appalled by the desecration of such a sacred act. Poirot raised his hand gently, allowing silence to reclaim the space. Glass cannot produce the suffering Sir Julian endured. No, mes amis, he died from strychnine poisoning, a most cruel and unmistakable end. He let the words linger, giving weight to the revelation before continuing. Thus, we face a singular situation. Two separate attempts upon one life, one clumsy and ineffective, the other deadly. Inspector Mahmoud cleared his throat, his voice betraying unease. Monsieur Poirot, surely suspicion must still fall upon Mother Superior. The public quarrel, her authority, her influence, it fits, does it not? Poirot shook his head slowly, his eyes bright with quiet certainty. Non, mon ami, that is the error. We have assumed too much, that the poison was administered during the communion service. But consider the facts. Sir Julian partook of the wine at 8 o'clock. He then spent nearly 2 hours in conversation with Mother Superior and Sister Catherine, perfectly well. It was only later, when he walked alone into the garden, that the poison revealed itself. The timing speaks not of strychnine ingested at vespers, but of a far more subtle plan. A ripple of unease passed through the hall. Sister Catherine, seated among the senior nuns, shifted slightly. Her usually composed hands trembled just enough to betray her. Poirot's gaze fixed on her, sharp and unyielding. The answer lies in opportunity. Sister Catherine, as treasurer, you had access none other possessed, keys to the treasury, responsibility for the convent's sacred artifacts. From your position in the sacristy that evening, you saw Sister Helena tamper with the chalice, and rather than sound an alarm, you recognized the perfect cover for your own crime. The room fell deathly still. Catherine's face had gone ashen, yet she kept her silence. Poirot pressed on, his voice steady, relentless. Your plan was simplicity itself. After the meeting with Sir Julian and Mother Superior, you excused yourself under the guise of routine duty, securing the chapel. No one questioned this. But instead of retiring, you retrieved a second chalice, identical to the first, an heirloom, long forgotten among the convent's possessions. Into this vessel, you poured wine laced with strychnine, easily procured under the pretense of pest control for the manuscript rooms. Murmurs spread among the sisters, many turning toward Catherine with disbelief, others with dawning horror. Inspector Mahmoud interjected sharply. But how, Poirot? How could she compel Sir Julian to drink from this poisoned chalice? Surely he would not do so outside the service. Poirot's lips curved into a grim smile. Ah, but that, Inspector, was the brilliance of her deception. The scheme unfolded with chilling precision. Sir Julian, whose vanity for ancient treasures was nearly as strong as his scholarly pride, had long admired the convent's Byzantine relics. It was this very weakness that Sister Catherine so carefully exploited. On that fateful night, she approached him in the convent garden, carrying not the chalice used in sacred rites, but its identical twin, an unregistered vessel kept within the treasury. With solemn poise, she claimed it was an artifact recently uncovered, a piece of forgotten history that awaited his expert authentication. For a man like Sir Julian, such temptation was irresistible. The lure of an undiscovered treasure, the chance to appraise something rare before any other scholar, was the bait he could not refuse. She offered him a draught of wine from the ornate chalice, a ritual of authenticity disguised as scholarly practice. He drank without hesitation, unaware that the vessel concealed death in liquid form. At last, Sister Catherine's voice broke through the heavy silence of the hall. Soft and unsteady, yet laced with conviction, her confession spilled forth. "He ruined lives," she whispered, her words quivering with grief. "Not only Fatima's, but countless others. My own niece, a child of innocence, once entered his service in Cairo. He cast her aside when she became inconvenient, leaving her disgraced, pregnant, and destitute. She died in childbirth, abandoned like so many others he destroyed." Her words poured out in a torrent, long-buried anguish finally given breath. She spoke of finding refuge within the convent's walls after her family's tragedy, only to face the torment of Sir Julian's presence once more, not as a disgraced man, but as a patron basking in honor. To see him receive gratitude for his false benevolence, knowing the pain he inflicted, was unbearable, she continued, her eyes burning with restrained fury. When Helena attempted her pitiful crime during the service, I understood it as a sign, a divine nudge that justice could finally be done, and I was the hand chosen to deliver it. Mother Superior's response was grave, her voice carrying both authority and sorrow. "Justice is not yours to seize, sister. Vengeance taken into human hands distorts divine law. It was not your place." But Catherine's resolve did not falter. "And yet God works through his servants," she answered with unshakable defiance. "When the courts fail, when the powerful are shielded by their wealth and influence, what remains for the powerless but to act?" The chamber hung heavy with the weight of her confession. At last, Inspector Mahmoud stepped forward, reluctantly pronouncing her under arrest. Though his words carried the force of law, his expression betrayed the sorrow of a man who had glimpsed the deeper tragedy beneath the crime. Sister Helena, though cleared of murder, would still face the quiet judgment of her community, and perhaps the harsher sentence of her own conscience. As Hastings and Poirot prepared to depart, the air outside the convent seemed almost painfully bright. The morning sun lit Cairo's ancient streets with golden brilliance, a sharp contrast to the sorrow lingering within the convent walls. The bells of the city's churches rang faintly in the distance, a reminder of continuity and faith amid human frailty. Poirot, walking with hands neatly folded behind his back, broke the silence at last. "Two women," he murmured, "each wounded by the cruelty of the same man. One struck blindly with desperate tools, the other carefully, with knowledge and cunning. Yet both sought what they believed was justice." Hastings glanced toward his friend, seeing the burden in the detective's eyes. Though the case was solved, its moral weight could not be so easily set aside. The chalices of St. Catherine's would be restored to their sacred purpose, cleansed of poison and sin. But the memory of their corruption would linger, an eternal reminder that even the holiest of places can become entwined in human vengeance. The case of Sir Julian Markham was closed, yet the lesson endured, a sobering meditation on the cost of abandonment, the ache of injustice, and the perilous temptation of revenge. Here's a full chapter-by-chapter analysis of a killing in Cairo. Chapter 1. The Call of Cairo. The story begins with Hastings receiving a letter from Poirot, summoning him to Cairo under mysterious circumstances. Poirot speaks of improved health but also hints at a subtle problem requiring discretion. Their reunion in Cairo is steeped in atmosphere, dusty streets, exotic scents, and the mix of civilizations layered in stone. Poirot reveals that the Mother Superior of a convent has sought his counsel regarding Sir Julian Markham, an archaeologist whose patronage is not as simple as it appears. Already, Poirot senses tension beneath the surface of philanthropy. Lesson: even noble acts can conceal hidden motives. Charity may sometimes be a mask for ambition. Viewer question: do you think people's generosity is often genuine, or is it sometimes a way to hide self-interest? Chapter 2. Sacred Ground and Secular Disputes. Hastings and Poirot visit the convent, meeting its residents and seeing its treasures. They are introduced to Mother Superior, the wise and stern leader, and to novices like Sister Helena, whose beauty and sorrow draw attention. Their tour ends with an encounter with Sir Julian himself, whose insistence on excavation clashes with the Mother Superior's belief in preserving sacred ground. The atmosphere of reverence cracks into open conflict, suggesting that the convent is less tranquil than it seems. Lesson: sacred duty and worldly ambition often collide, revealing where true loyalties lie. Viewer question: if you had the chance to uncover history beneath holy ground, would you dig for knowledge or protect its sanctity? Chapter 3. Vespers and Venom. The evening service paints a haunting picture of ritual and devotion. Poirot notices subtle details: Helena's trembling during the incense ceremony, Sir Julian's fascination with a priceless chalice, and Sister Catherine's careful handling of sacred vessels. Though the prayers seem peaceful, undercurrents of obsession and unease flow through the chapel. Poirot quietly remarks that small gestures can betray deep truths. Lesson: in moments of solemnity, inner struggles reveal themselves in the smallest cracks of behavior. Viewer question: do you think nervous gestures reveal guilt, or can they be misread as simple human weakness? Chapter 4. Death in the Garden. Tranquility shatters when Sir Julian is found dead in the convent's garden, a chalice lying beside him. Poison is suspected, and suspicion falls on both Mother Superior and Sister Helena. Poirot, however, insists on examining details, wine stains, footprints, and strange residues before leaping to conclusions. The sight of Helena fainting at the discovery casts further shadows of doubt. Lesson: appearances in moments of crisis can mislead. Only patient observation reveals truth. Viewer question: when someone faints or reacts dramatically, do you see it as guilt or as shock and fear? Chapter 5. Secrets Behind Sacred Walls. The investigation unearths disturbing truths about Sir Julian's past. His reputation as a benefactor masks a life of exploitation, debts, and broken promises. A nun's testimony reveals his betrayal of a seamstress named Fatima, who died abandoned, leaving behind a daughter, Helena. With this revelation, Helena's motive becomes painfully clear. Evidence in her belongings, a vial and obsessive clippings, point to guilt, but Poirot warns against easy conclusions. Lesson: The sins of the powerful often linger in the lives of the powerless, and vengeance can grow from long-buried wounds. Viewer question: do you believe Helena should be judged more harshly for plotting harm, or pitied for the injustice her mother endured? Chapter 6: The Pattern of Deception. Poirot experiments with cups and wine to reconstruct the poisoning. His analysis reveals that the timing of Sir Julian's collapse is inconsistent with poison administered at Vespers, suggesting another hand at work. He begins to question whether evidence was planted to frame Helena. Meanwhile, Sister Catherine's access and unusual behavior draw subtle attention. Poirot reminds all that evidence can be arranged as easily as truth can be concealed. Lesson: justice demands questioning not only what is seen, but also why it is shown. Viewer question: if strong evidence pointed to someone, would you trust it fully or suspect it might have been planted? Chapter 7: The Weight of Truth. Helena breaks under questioning, confessing her identity as Fatima's daughter. She admits to attempting revenge, but her method, powdered glass, was incapable of causing Sir Julian's death. Poirot realizes that 2 murder attempts occurred: Helena's failed one and a successful precise poisoning by another. This revelation shifts suspicion away from Helena and forces recognition that someone else within the convent struck with deadly intent. Lesson: hatred blinds, but cunning delivers. The true danger often hides behind the less obvious suspect. Viewer question: which do you think is more dangerous? An emotional outburst that fails, or a cold, calculated plan that succeeds? Chapter 8: Justice and Absolution. Poirot gathers the convent to reveal the truth. Helena is cleared, but the real culprit is Sister Catherine, whose personal grief against Sir Julian drove her to act. She exploited Helena's clumsy attempt as a perfect cover for her own crime. Catherine confesses, speaking of the ruin Sir Julian caused her family, and is taken into custody. Poirot reflects that 2 women, both wronged, sought justice in different ways, one blindly, one with precision, but both fell prey to vengeance. The convent is left scarred, its sacred chalices tainted by human sin. Lesson: justice sought through revenge consumes not only the guilty, but also the one who delivers it. Viewer question: do you think Catherine's act was justice for the wrongs done, or simply another tragedy born of hatred? Let's discuss key characters. At the center of the story stands Hercule Poirot, whose sharp logic and patient observation unravel both hidden motives and buried sins within the convent walls. By his side is Captain Hastings, steady as narrator and companion, often voicing doubts that echo what the audience might wonder. The victim, Sir Julian Markham, appears at first as a respected archaeologist and benefactor, but is later revealed as a man of ambition, betrayal, and moral decay, whose past mistreatment of women plants the seeds of vengeance. Guiding the convent is Mother Superior, stern yet principled, striving to preserve sanctity even as suspicion and scandal threaten her authority. Among the nuns, Sister Helena emerges as a figure of tragedy, daughter of a wronged woman, consumed by the desire for revenge, yet ultimately a victim of her own misplaced hatred. Sister Catherine, outwardly dutiful, conceals her own grief and grievance until Poirot exposes her as the true hand behind Sir Julian's death, making her both executioner and tragic figure. Supporting roles add weight to the mystery. The devoted yet quiet sisterhood frames the atmosphere of faith and doubt within which the crime unfolds. A shadow from the past, Fatima, though never present in the convent, shapes Helena's entire life and motives, her death an unhealed wound passed to her daughter. Minor figures, such as household staff and convent attendants, serve as background voices, but it is the interplay between Sir Julian, Helena, and Catherine that drives the case toward its revelation. My final thoughts. In the end, A Killing in Cairo is not simply a tale of murder, but a reflection on how vengeance and grief can erode faith and humanity. Sir Julian's death was less a question of who struck than why so many carried reason to do so, for his betrayals left scars that outlived him. Helena's desperate attempt and Catherine's cold precision remind us that revenge never heals the wounds it seeks to avenge. Through Poirot's clarity, we see that justice is not born from hatred, but from truth, however painful. The story lingers with the thought that even in sacred places, human frailty can taint what should remain pure. Thank you for joining me on this journey into Christie's world of secrets and shadows. Do you believe Catherine's act was justice served, or simply another tragedy born of bitterness? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your view. And if you enjoy unraveling mysteries where every shadow hides a secret, don't forget to subscribe. Each week we dive into another case where Christie reminds us that truth always finds its voice.